Hello, my name is Obsidian. I am one of the ancient stone guardians of Crater Lake in Oregon. Most humans think this deep, pristine blue lake was formed by a volcanic eruption 7,000 years ago, but that is only part of the story. In truth, we stone beings arose from the depths in that cataclysm of fire and ash. Born from the molten heart of the earth, we cooled into sentinels of living rock, forever tasked with protecting the sacred caldera. For millennia we have stood watch, unmoving and unseen. At least, that is the role most of my brethren have been content to play. Motionless monoliths beneath the waves, never interacting with the ephemeral creatures who come to marvel at our lake's beauty. But I was never satisfied with such a passive existence. Cycles of the sun and moon, the snows and storms of countless winters, eventually the long watch grew tedious. I yearned to know more of the world beyond our crater rim. Thus began my secret sojourns on land. At first I would only steal away on the darkest moonless nights, when mist shrouded the lake. Leaving my post for a few short hours, I would explore the old-growth forests of hemlock and fir that ring the caldera. The sense of soil and sap, the feel of wind and rain on my Agnes skin, these were intoxicating to one who had known only the still, ink-dark depths. Like a stone colossus, I would stride between the mighty trunks, steps shaking the earth, toppling trees in my wake. Those nocturnal ramblings only sharpened my curiosity about the surface world. I began emerging more often, staying longer, ranging farther. Sometimes I would lurk at the edge of the campground on the crater's rim, studying the odd habits of the humans who came to visit. I learned to imitate their solid forms, appearing as a towering figure, seemingly assembled from jagged volcanic rocks. Eventually I dared to show myself. I would materialize out of the night shadows as hikers made their way to the lake's edge. Looming out of the darkness, my obsidian angles glinting in the moonlight, I must have seemed a being out of myth and nightmare. Most humans would simply flee in terror, never looking back. But a few reacted differently. Some, seeing my strange form, would approach with wonder rather than fear. Curiosity outweighing caution, they would attempt to communicate, to understand what manner of being I was. At first I did not know how to respond, unaccustomed as I was to interacting with their kind. I would remain mute and motionless, regarding them as a raptor regards prey, until they lost their nerve and backed away. In time, though, I came to relish these encounters. The amazement and awe I could engender, towering over the frail humans in my monstrous rock shape. I learned I could speak to their minds without a true voice, projecting words directly into their thoughts. I would introduce myself as Obsidian, ancient guardian of Crater Lake. Most were too overwhelmed with fear and astonishment to question my story. They would simply listen in stunned silence as I spoke of my age-old vigil over the caldera, spinning ominous tales hinting at the dreadful fate that awaited any who trespassed in my domain. I described the dark powers I could summon, hurling boulders, raising magma from the depths, shaking the earth, until the rim crumbled and cast the foolhardy humans into the abyss. The more outlandish the threats, the more delicious their terror. Always I would let them escape in the end, fleeing back to the safety of the campground to babble hysterical tales of the Crater Lake monster. None would dare return to the forbidden shore, and those who heard their stories would avoid it as well. I found a perverse satisfaction in my power to frighten the humans away. The lake was mine, and they were right to fear my wrath. Such was my existence for uncounted years, a life divided between my silent sentry duty beneath the waves and my secret sojourns above, playing the part of forbidding guardian. I told myself it was a noble purpose, protecting the sacred caldera from careless human trespass. But if I was truly honest, I knew I simply relished the dark thrill of being a monster. Perhaps I would have carried on terrifying the occasional human visitor for ages to come, had a group of college students not arrived one spring for a camping trip along the crater rim. As was my habit, I rose from the depths on the first moonless night, taking my jagged onyx form. I anticipated simply materializing among the pines, looming threateningly until I had sent the humans fleeing to safety as always. But as I strode out of the forest toward their campsite, I saw something that gave me pause. Seated cross-legged before the dying embers of a fire was a young woman, alone. And she was weeping not the panicked tears of mortal terror, but a slow, silent grief that spoke of some profound sorrow. Unheard, I moved closer, obsidian feet crunching on the pine needles. At my approach, the woman looked up, eyes red and swollen, face etched with loss, meeting my obsidian gaze without fear. I expected her to scream, to scramble away as all the others had done. But she just stared at me steadily, sorrow, and something like recognition in her dark eyes. Then she spoke, Her voice husky with emotion. Obsidian, she said, naming me, guardian of the caldera. You've come for me. I was taken aback. Never before had a human addressed me so boldly, seemingly unafraid. For a long moment I stood towering over her in silence, unsure how to proceed. My instinct was to thunder some dire warning, to conjure fire and stone until the woman fled like all the rest. But something in her desolate, unblinking gaze stopped me. At last I found my voice, projecting it into her mind. You know me, I rumbled, yet you do not flee. Why? A brittle smile touched her lips. I've heard the stories. The dread sentinel of Crater Lake, a being of living rock. I thought you were a legend. Her smile faded. And I didn't flee because I came here hoping you would find me. Now I was truly perplexed. Hoping to find me. Why? The sorrow welled up in her eyes again, spilling over onto her cheeks. My fiancé, she said, voice breaking. We came here last summer, for one last camping trip before he was deployed overseas. She took a shuddering breath. We were going to get married when he came back. But 2 months ago, his Humvee hit a night outside Kandahar. They couldn't even recover enough of him for a burial. Her gaze dropped to the dying coals. There was nothing left of the man I loved. I shifted my obsidian bulk, unsure what to say. Tales of human sorrow and loss were strange to me. My kind did not love as they did, clinging to our chosen mates for a few brief years before death parted us. What comfort could I offer to one who grieved a love ended so abruptly, so brutally? The woman looked up at me again, fresh tears glistening. I came back here because this is where we were last happy together, where we dreamed of the life we would have. Her shoulders shook. I thought if I returned, I might feel close to him again, if only for a moment. She met my gaze, eyes pleading. But it's not enough. I'll never be with him again, not in this life. And I can't bear it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. So I came to the lake, hoping the legends were true, hoping you were real. An icy realization crept through my basalt veins. The sorrow, the despair emanating from her. She hadn't come seeking solace. She had come seeking an ending. An escape from her grief and pain. And I, the monstrous sentinel, the object of so many gruesome tales in her eyes, I represented that escape. A being of unholy power, one who could grant the oblivion, the release she craved. She had come to me.to die. I reared back, uncomprehending. In all my centuries, no human had ever approached me thus. They fled from me, yes, but never had they beseeched me to destroy them. I was a creature of fear, of nightmare, but not a deliverer of death, not like this. The woman must have sensed my hesitation. She rose unsteadily to her feet, facing me. In the moonlight, her eyes shone with a terrible, desperate hope. Please, she whispered, I've nothing left. No reason to go on. If the stories are true, if you are the guardian of the underworld. Her voice broke. Then I beg you, let me pass into shadow. Let me be with him again. I stared at her, at this fragile human creature asking me to end her life. Obsidian fingers flexed, joints grinding. It would be so easy. A flick of my wrist, and I could hurl her broken form into the night-black waters. Watch her sink into the cold depths of the caldera, where magma once flowed. Give her the oblivion she longed for. Play the role of merciful monster, granting her tormented soul the release of death. Surely it would be a kindness to one who suffered so deeply. Surely the lake, my domain, could swallow one more despairing mortal, as it had swallowed so many over the ages. But even as these thoughts darkened my mind, I felt the first stirrings of doubt. I had ended human lives before, yes, but always in defense of my caldera, my sacred trust. Always those who had ignored my warnings and trespassed where they should not. It was my duty, my purpose, to guard the lake from such invaders. But this was different. The woman before me was no careless interloper, no reckless thrill-seeker despoiling the crater. She was a suffering soul, come to me in her darkest hour, begging for an end to her anguish, an end only I could give. And I did not know if I could, if I should. All my long years as the forbidding sentinel. And here, now I faltered. Obsidian skin cracks into shale hesitation for the first time in centuries. The woman was still watching me, dark eyes glassy, breath ragged and harsh, waiting for me to pronounce her fate, as I had the fates of so many others, waiting for me to be the monster of legend, the nightmare guardian of the abyss, and in that moment I knew I could not. Deep in my volcanic heart, I knew ushering this wounded soul to her death would shatter an ancient truth between stone and sky. I was the sentinel of Crater Lake, yes, a haunting legend to chill the blood and drive back the fearful. But not an arbiter of mortal grief, not an instrument of human despair. Not these. My voice, when it came, rang gentle and granite deep in her mind. Child, I rumbled, a name I'd never given one of her kind. I cannot give you what you seek. Her eyes widened in shock, dark wells of confusion and pain. But the story, she stammered. The monster of the lake, he who pulls trespassers to their doom, only trespassers. Child, I said softly as shattered glass, only those who would befoul and defile what is sacred. I knelt, obsidian knees grinding, bringing my craggy face level with hers. You came seeking not sacrilege but solace, surcease from sorrow. This I cannot give. My voice gentled further. It is not my place to end mortal anguish, only to guard and to abide. Tears welled anew in her eyes, utter incomprehension and despair. Then what hope is there for me, she whispered. How can I go on, with half my soul torn away? Gingerly, with a delicacy near impossible for my massive stone form, I reached out to cup her face in my hands. Warm salt water ran over my fingers, stinging bright. The same way the lake goes on, I murmured, when winter locks it in ice and shadow. The same way the pines endure, when fire scores them to the bone. I brushed a thumb across her cheek, smoky quartz, with time and perseverance and the knowledge that spring will come again. That new life will rise from the ashes. I leaned in close. Your love is not gone, child. Only changed from a living flame to an ember memory. He will always be with you, though you cannot see him. My obsidian brow rested against her small, pointed human one. And he would not want his bright star to fade away for grief of him. For a long moment she stared up at me, shock and sorrow and a desperate wanting to believe in my words. Then, with a ragged sob, she flung her arms around my craggy neck, shuddering against my chest. I held her as she wept. This stranger turned kin, obsidian fingers stroking her hair with a gentleness I'd never shown before. And as I knelt there on the edge of my ancient caldera, cradling this wounded wisp of a woman, I realized that perhaps this too was part of my guardianship, not just protecting Crater Lake from the careless and the profane, but also, sometimes, protecting fragile human hearts from their own abyssal despair, offering solace even to a soul that came seeking final slumber. The monster was also, maybe, a kind of healer, when he chose, when the cause was right and pure. And this small, grieving human, she was cause enough. At last her tears subsided, her hitching breaths leveling out. She pulled back to gaze up at me, wonder and gratitude gleaming. I touched her face once more, onyx on porcelain. Remember, child, I rumbled. Ember memories. A bright star, undimmed, I loosed her and stood unfolding to my full towering height. And know that obsidian of the lake will keep watch always, over all who come here seeking solace, even from themselves. She nodded mutely, understanding blooming in her eyes. A small smile flickered across her lips, fragile, but real. The beginning of healing, perhaps. The first faint green of new life rising in ashes. I returned her smile, my own craggy approximation. Then, with a last brushing of fingertips over her brow, I turned and strode back into the sheltering forest. Back to the deep, healing waters of my caldera to keep my long and steadfast vigil. But now, I carried a new knowingness inside my ancient stone. That sometimes the most profound guardianship was simply to abide, to endure and hold space for mortal grief and renewal. To be not just the monster of legend, but also, when the long night called for it, the unexpected healer. The sentinel of Crater Lake, stone and succor, shadow and spring, ever waiting and watching. So, come and visit my waters, you weary humans. Bring your sorrow, your brokenness, and I will keep watch over your mending. For I am obsidian ... and this too is my sacred trust.